interventions. The other part of that puzzle or coin is 35% of the families were not able to attend as many of the sessions that we thought required for them to really be able to gain the positive impact of the program. And so when you look at this particular model, what we're showing here is that the change in positive parenting had greater benefit or impact on families who were at greatest risk. So when you look at the interventions program's effect on positive parenting, those at greatest need were the ones that were benefiting, or the change in their parenting was elevated much more higher than the ones at low risk, which further speaks to the importance of finding ways to include those that are having difficulty attending these programs for which they greatly need access to. The other thing that we were able to show is that intervention was positively linked to the positive parenting and negatively linked to families who were at high risk, having various kinds of family risk factors in their lives. So the question then becomes for us, what was explaining the barriers for these non-attendants? Many of these families in the counties that Jean showed you in Georgia lack transportation. Most of them were coming to the programs either by shared no car, which then we provide the transportation for them, or shared cars in which they came with extended family members. We also found that there was inflexibility in the work schedule, such that sometimes these people were shift working. So if the program is at 6 o'clock on Wednesday nights, they may have to then go to work that evening. So how do you begin to navigate your life for a program that you may want to become a part of, but you're a shift worker, maybe working in the poultry factory in Georgia, which then explains getting off work really exhausted because of how laborious your tasks are during the day doing shift work or any kind of factory work. And many of them had responsibilities for caring for children other than those that were targeted for the intervention. Then there are also community level barriers if we're talking about sustaining a program in a community once we leave. One of the things that we find, and interestingly, the patterns in Tennessee, which is where I'm doing my work now, is a lot like the patterns in the communities where the work was done at Georgia, in that there's greater dependence on non-farm-based jobs because mega farms have begun to take over, getting rid of then the dependency that many families were able to live off the land. So there are limited employment opportunities in these rural communities, and I mentioned earlier the shift work patterns, and the reason for a lot of the change in the economic disparities in these counties has to do with the fact that many of the manufacturing companies have moved overseas, for which we now know that our president is going to tax people that don't bring our jobs back home. And then there's a lack of non-agrarian then business available in these communities. So if you're trying to ask a community to begin to sustain a program of this magnitude, there's low revenue that's being benefited or emerging from the business sector in these communities. There's also an increase in patterns of population decline in these communities, such that a lot of grandmothers are raising their grandchildren. I was talking with some of your faculty about that earlier, which has implications for who's available then to come to these various programs. And many of these families have now begun to experience high violence in the communities with the migration of a lot of the families who once lived in the northern communities now migrating into southern communities. So these practical as well as logistic barriers may have some inherent problems when you're trying to deliver a group-based format and trying to get families to participate when they're confronting many of these barriers. So the thought became evident to me that if we're beginning to see the utilization of technology interventions in individualized programs, how might we then begin to think about the implication of that format for delivering family-based preventive interventions to our families in these rural communities? For example, we know that technology has been used to treat various kinds of phobia, depression, obesity, diabetes. We've also found that it has been useful in deterring substance use among urban youth and also HIV-related risk behaviors in reducing those behaviors among adults. So the implication then for e-learning as a family-based preventive intervention suggests that with the advances in technology and this widespread use of computer-based software, we could then begin to think of ways we may be able to move a program that has been shown efficacious into a computer-based interactive process in order to then begin to think of its eventual use for diffusing the program. So in addressing and reducing barriers then, my thought was increased access to computer-based programming may facilitate an increase in offerings of these programs and accessibility to rural families, and then overcome some of the barriers that these families may be experiencing that's creating an inconvenience for them not being able to attend these programs. And if this program is shown to be efficacious, then it provides a menu of delivery modalities that people that are planning to adopt programs like this can begin to select from depending on the circumstance that's confronting their families, so that if this program is efficacious, churches may be able to utilize this or have it available in libraries for people to check out, and more importantly, have it available so that people can begin to access it on the internet, and you don't have to leave the comforts of your home to be exposed to wonderful information included in this program. So how available is technology to rural families? Well, what we now know is that computer literacy among those who are disadvantaged and those living in rural areas is becoming less evident, or more evident. Such that people are getting used to understanding how to use computers. Access to computers is also rapidly increasing, so the digital divide, not only across socioeconomic status, but between gender, is also decreasing. And then studies, including African American youth and adult, indicate that they can be highly engaged in learning if it's done through computer-assisted learning. And so in looking at how the advice that has been given to us about how to begin to scale up programs for the dissemination and diffusion, it suggests from both theoretical and empirical evidence that dissemination of programs need to be thinking about a transportable way of moving an evidence-based program from that control research oversight to real-life experiences that people will live and use on a daily basis, and increase the sustainability of the program once the university staff is gone and is no longer overseeing what's happening in those with regard to that program. So I'm going to provide then a strategy that I've undertaken into presenting a different modality of delivering a program of this nature that is separate and different from the traditional format of delivering programs. So the research design was, it's a modified version of the SAFE program, and it has a minimum control group. So there are three conditions, and the three conditions are one group of families will be exposed to a group format, testing the group format in Tennessee. The other group would be exposed to a computer technology-driven format, and the third group will receive educational mail-outs about risk behavior and positive youth development. Alongside that, a question one would pose is, if both program formats or modalities are efficacious, which one would be most cost-effective? So alongside this randomized controlled trial, we've also developed measures and procedures for beginning to conduct economic evaluation of this trial. So the heuristic model that guides the work that we're doing is similar to a lot of the indicators from the SAFE program, with more emphasis on HIV vulnerability behavior, because it's an HIV-funded research project. And so we're looking still at targeting those things that are related to positive, competent, promoting parenting, and that we think those things in turn forecast positive internal working models in children, which then helps them make really good decisions when they are confronted with risk engagement situation, and that by the time they reach emerging adulthood, if we've inoculated them in a very substantial way during those middle childhood years, we'll see those positive outcomes continue to be manifested as they become emerging adults. The program is going